Hi, HRN listeners. We're celebrating our 15th anniversary, and we have a really fun campaign and an ask for you. This 15th anniversary tour is aiming to bring you closer to unique food and music experiences in some of the most exciting cities in America. All the while, we're raising funds to support our work empowering the next generation of food systems storytellers through our fellowship programs. Here's how it works. Donate to HRN and be entered into a raffle in the city of your choice to win a dinner for two at a noteworthy restaurant and tickets for two to a concert at a prominent local venue. We have incredible partners in New York, Los Angeles, Philadelphia, Nashville, Las Vegas, Charleston, Asheville, and Ardmore, Pennsylvania, who have donated a meal for two and two tickets to a concert of the winner's choice. And all donations help fund our fellowship programs, where we're helping to build essential workforce readiness skills and food system storytelling skills. Check out heritageradionetwork.org/15 to donate and enter to win today. That's heritageradionetwork.org/15. Thank you.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network. HRN is food radio supported by you. Learn more at heritageradionetwork.org.
Hey, welcome to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. I'm Jimmy Carboni. I'm the host here on Beer Sessions Radio now in our 14th year. Wow, this is the weekend of the Craft Malt Conference, long awaited, the first time in person in over 3 years, and we're in Portland, Maine, where I've never really been before. We're going to be recording a whole bunch of episodes, which will be, aired over the next couple of months into March and April and May of 2023. So we're starting off we're in Maine, so we're going to talk to some guys from Maine. We're going to go around the room and they're going to introduce themselves. Of course, they're from Allagash and Blue Ox Malt, which are a big feature of the conference because we are in Portland, Maine. But the gentlemen, please introduce yourself.
I'm Branch Rothschild. I'm the brewhouse manager at Allagash Brewing and a board member of the Craft Maltsters Guild.
Thanks for joining us, Branch. Jason Perkins said, you got to talk to Branch. And by the way, he's on the board of the Craft Maltsters Guild. So thank you. And
hi, everybody. I'm Ben Clegg from Blue Ox Malt House. I'm the business development specialist at Blue Ox. Thank you for having me, Jimmy.
It's great. There's a lot going on here in the world of malt. I think every expert, there's people here from Minnesota, Denmark with new technologies, Virginia, North Carolina, and beyond. And I've been lucky the last couple of years through the Craft Maltsters Guild and through Emily at Rad Craft Beer. I've got to interview quite a few of the big names in craft malt. Well, these are two guys that are working, that are a very important part of that process. They probably haven't been on too many podcasts, so this is the perfect opportunity for me to talk to them. So let's start with Branch. Branch, just tell us about your background. You've been at Allagash a long time. We're talking about Allagash, just your experience, your job, and how you got working in it. And then we'll also just talk about the evolution of Allagash using craft malt in your brewing.
I started Allagash 15 years ago now, which kind of shocks me. Like, I never thought I would have a job that long. But I started off it's my first brewing job. Before this, I was a baker right here in Portland, which I also loved, but I didn't love the baker's hours. So I actually worked with someone else who still works at Allagash, Greg DeVito's wife. I was a baker with her, and she was like, yeah, Allagash is looking for someone. And she knew I did some home brewing, and I was into it. So I applied and did a lot of kegging, a lot of bottling line, and just sort of worked my way up.
You definitely did work your way up, man. All right. And then, Van, a little intro from you about, your work in the industry. I mean, you've been a brewer too.
Yeah, so I've worked in the beer industry for about 6.5 or so years now. I worked at a brewery up in Portland for about 5 years, Lone Pine Brewing. Much like Branch, did a little bit of everything, primarily, cleaning kegs, filling kegs. That kind of graduated onto filling bottles, and then in turn selling those bottles. I helped out kind of start up our self-distribution for Lone Pine, which gave me kind of a good insight on the lay of the land, as it were, and how much, it was rapidly changing in Maine, and still is. And then most recently, I've jumped on ship with Blue Ox Malt. So now I'm kind of on the ingredient side of things. They were a company that, I was familiar with on the liquid side, but not really on the grain side. So that's been really interesting for me, kind of jumping into the good stuff, the barley.
So as brewers, let's talk about your evolution as brewers working with, local or regional malt. Like, Branch, do you remember the first time that you were brewing with a local malt, and, a few anecdotes?
I think the first time we brewed with local malt, it was sort of local, was we did a beer called Hugh Malone, which was one of the only hoppy beers we did back then. It was a fundraiser for MAFCA, which is the Maine Organic Farmer and Gardeners Association. So we wanted to incorporate local grain into that out of respect for Maine. And it was really hard to source. Like, we ended up having to source some through the Maine potato growers, but then it actually got sent up to Canada to be malted and then back down through New York and back to us. And it didn't feel all that local, but that was our first chance to really use some local malt.
And what about brewing with that malt? I mean, was it different than working with the other commercial stuff you'd use?
It's a little different. I mean, fundamentally it's the same. We're able to convert it. It's good malt. I would say it's not all that different, except in the sense that I do think it has some flavor differences. Like, we're getting, back then everything was floor malted, and at least initially, with all the Maine maltsters, which I think gives it a little different character than the commercial malt we were using.
Great. And what about you, Ben?
I can actually remember. So one of the things that I fondly remember in my early days at Lone Pine, actually, one of our first grain deliveries came from Blue Ox, and it was actually Joel himself unloading the box truck. We didn't have a lift gate, so we ended up having to take every bag off the pallet and repalletize it, which was a bit of a process. But just seeing that kind of level of care and having that connection with the people that were malting our grain made a big difference for us. Having that relationship, and now being on the Blue Ox side of things, it's nice to kind of hear some of the struggles early on where the malt was kind of going from Maine to Canada back to Maine. We really like to be that sort of interface between Maine farms and Maine brewers, kind of making sure everything stays on that steady supply chain and stays within the state.
Last night we were at Navari Res and we co-hosted a really great little mixer tasting with you guys and Katie and Dave from Blue Ox Malt. There were some pretty cool beers there. Do you want to tell me about a couple of them? Because I know that some of them were made with Blue Ox Malt.
Yeah. So we had 10 draft lines, all of which featured Craft Malt in some capacity, and furthermore, Blue Ox in some capacity. One of the primary examples of that was Weathered Rake, which was brewed at Bellflower with 4 different craft malts. So that was Blue Ox, Maine Malt House, Valley Malt, and Hudson Valley Malt. And it was a Vienna-style Keller beer, and really turned out just wonderful. Most of the beers that we did feature tended to be a little bit more towards the malty side. I think we only had 1, maybe 2 IPAs on, which was a nice change of pace. IPAs still being kind of one of the more talked about styles. But yeah, it was a great event. It's always nice to kind of be able to, taste the end product, because there is so much transformation between, just like the raw barley and the hot steep to, when we get to the final stages of fermentation. So yeah, it was good stuff.
It's kind of time for the malt to shine too. Like, you can only drink so many IPAs.
Amen to that.
Well, it's last night it was kind of my dream, because I got to taste so many different malt-based beers that were made regionally from regional malts. But it shifted my palate. I talk about palate a lot because you drink something bitter, it's hard to go back. So after having a couple of the Northwood It was the Dunkel that was made with Blue Ox malt. Real nice Dunkel. It was exactly what I wanted when I walked in. After my third one, I said, you know what? I might have had enough of this malt, and I want to go to the next level. And by mistake, I did take a hoppy pale ale. So you guys want to talk about the difference on your palate going from more malt forward beer to a hoppy beer? Because I actually couldn't make the transition.
I'm not sure I'm great at making that transition either. And I feel like there's a whole nother level too, where a lot of our beers are more yeast focused and you're getting a lot of that ester. It's almost another dimension at which you can work in. I don't have a good way of transitioning. Like,
What should I have had after that Dunkel lager? That what style of beer might have been a good recommendation, even if it wasn't there?
Allagash White's always a good choice.
How about I was thinking like some kind of a celebrator, like a Doppelbock or something, another lager. And I think this whole thing is making me appreciate lagers. I wanted to say, and I said it to Jesse at the guild. I said, you guys should say talking malt, drinking lager, because it seems that that's a great way to represent it. What about you, Ben? The palate shift going from malty beers. What would you go up in weight? How would you go? Have you had this nice Dunkel lager? What else can you drink?
Yeah, I'd probably step into either, the maltier direction, or I would just go for something that's a little bit yeast focused, like a Belgian style. The thing about hops is that it's sort of like a compounding flavor, as it were. It's like eating something spicy. Palate fatigue is a real thing. Anybody who's ever been to a beer fest and has tried more than 5 double IPAs knows that after that you're kind of subdued on the palate. So I think hoppy beers kind of exist within their own very prominent lane. But I would have either sprung for a palate cleanser like Allagash White, or just kind of leaned into the malty stuff.
I will say too, when I'm out, sometimes if I've had a couple of drinks, I always want to go to the double IPA, just because once you're there, you can't go back, right?
And I think another good option might be like going more with something roasty, like still malt forward, but with some of that roast astringency to kind of clean off the palate a bit and change it up.
Yeah. So how do you go more malt forward? If I have a Dunkel, I'm just using that because, or whether it's a Czech dark lager or a Dunkel. What do you mean by more malt? Do you mean things like roasted malts or just more gravity?
I would say, you could even venture outside of the lager realm into, porters and stouts. A Baltic porter would probably be a great fit for something like that. You get a little bit of sweetness, but you also have some of that roasted character. There's multiple avenues that you can kind of go from a Dunkel. I think that's a pretty good starting point as far as, the first beers of the night for, an event like that. But, I would say even smoked malt. The more playful that you can get on the malt side, from there, the better. But yeah.
And let's keep talking about your roasted malt. And then we're also going to talk about how the yeast, whatever makeup of that beer is also going to let you go to that next level.
Well, I guess with the moving to a more roasted malt would just sort of, I feel like it almost cuts through more. Whereas like when you're getting those real grainy kind of mouth coating, which is delicious, sometimes that can get more fatiguing. And I feel like some of that roastiness and astringency you're still having that, but it's helping cut through some of it. If it's appropriate to the style. And then, I don't know, I'm a big fan of, Belgian style yeasts. And I just feel like that adds like a nice kind of, it's more of an aromatic component. I realize that you taste it all in the mouth, but a lot of, even the graininess is like a aromatic compound, but pairing that with some esters and phenols that you might get from your yeast are a nice way to go.
And right now, I'm drinking the Allagash 16 Counties. To me, it's a myth beer because people have talked about it. It doesn't often get outside of Maine. So I think once I had one keg in New York City about 3 or 4 years ago. Tell me about that beer, because now that you're talking about yeast, I'm tasting yeast. What malts are in that beer? So let's talk about the 16 counties and what it is. And I think Ben's going to weigh in too.
So 16 Counties is made entirely with Maine grown and sourced and malted grain. So we get malt from Blue Ox, malt from Maine Malt House. We got oats from Aurora Mills and grain and Farm and Mills, and Maine Grain wheat. Maine Grains is another mill here in Maine in Skowhegan. So it's all of those, and it's actually bittered with hops also grown in Maine at the Hop Yard and at Aroostook Hops up in Aroostook. So that was the beer. When we made that Hugh Malone, it sort of inspired us to maybe try to go further with that. And it was right around the time when Blue Ox and Maine Malt House were starting, and we realized it could actually become a reality. So that's sort of how we started with the beer. We stopped distributing it in New York, which is probably why you haven't seen it.
Yeah, no, it's great to drink that here, but there's something about it that's it's calling me back. I'm going to drink more of those. And Ben, do you want to talk about the 16 counties and some of the other beers that you guys are providing malt for in Maine?
Yeah, 16 counties is kind of one of the perfect examples of sort of Blue Ox's mission as a company and a malt house. Just really trying to fortify that connection between the Maine farms and the Maine brewers, and then eventually, Maine beer drinkers. I think that it's a pretty illustrious conglomeration of people. And to be able to kind of be a connection between all of them is really where we want to be, and seeing that in liquid form it's great. It's and it's on top of that, it's a delicious beer. But we talk about locality a lot and terroir and things like that, and how much of that is expressed in flavor, notwithstanding, just being able to fortify the kind of the ecosystem of the beer industry is really nice. Allagash does that with every beer they make. Maine's a fiercely loyal state. A lot of what we've been talking about is Maine, but even thinking about locality is like a 300-mile radius. Northwoods, which we brewed with, we did the Dunkel with them, 100% our malt. That's that's just as local, as far as it goes. I mean, it's over state lines, but I mean, they're right in our backyard still. So just kind of being able to be part of that sort of New England beer ecosystem is definitely a privilege.
So where do you guys drink in this area? Because I'm still here for a couple of days. I'm going out. I was at Novari Res. I'm going to go back and drink more of those craft malt beers on tap. Where else do you drink?
I drink a lot at work. No, I don't. No, I go to Novari Res a lot. I took it for granted for a long time, but going to other towns, I didn't realize just how good I had it having Novari here. I go there. Maps is another bar I like, kind of downstairs, basement bar. My cousin has a restaurant here, so I find myself headed there a lot. It's Terlingua, which is a barbecue place, but has a nice bar. And my local is probably the Zoo. It's the closest bar to where I live, and it's kind of a nice scene, indoor, outdoor. I like there a lot too.
It's a pretty cool drinking scene.
Oh wait, I'm not done. And then we just have so many bars, so many breweries that also have tasting rooms. So I find myself going to those a lot. Rising Tide. I mean, just in my neighborhood, Rising Tide and Austin Street and Good Fire and Bellflower and UFF and Oxbow, Root Wild, Apres. Those are all within a 50 or 10-minute walk from my house, 5-minute walk.
So is there some at a couple of those places you mentioned? Is there a go-to drink there, or are things always rotating?
There are go-to drinks there. It all depends which one I'm going to, but I try to try new things just so I know what's happening. I used to be able to know all the local breweries and what they're releasing and what to get, but there are too many now, so I have to ask.
Well, talking to Branch and Ben, there's a lot of talent in Portland. It's not it's a big state geographically, but it's not really a big state. And I heard before that Joel from Blue Ox, they were talking about just how Maine buys Maine and the local importance. But there's a lot of really talented people in this town.
Thank you.
I knew that. I was setting you up. And Ben, what about you? Places to go in Portland?
Branch covered most of my, my sort of local watering holes, but the few that I think I would mention in addition to that, the Great Lost Bear. They're an institution that long predates me even being alive. And, I think they have upwards of 70 taps. They ferociously carry Maine beer, whether it's the newest brewery or, breweries that have been established for a long time. So that's a great place to try beers that might not necessarily make it all over the state. Some of the smaller, more northern breweries in the state of Maine. And then the Thirsty Pig holds a special place in my heart because it was one of the first places that I had a beer after turning 21. So it's just sort of, it was a Narragansett. It wasn't anything too crafty, but still local. And then a bar that probably doesn't get many shout outs in terms of craft beer, but is one that I find myself at quite a bit, is Howie's Pub. You can find, extremely fresh local offerings from Allagash, Bissell, Lone Pine. They've got a constantly rotating selection of, local stuff as well as, your sort of macro mainstays. So it's, definitely a place to check out if you're in town, off the beaten path a little bit, not on the peninsula, but just over on outer Washington. So, yeah.
Well, that's great. Hold on. We're going to take a short break. We'll be back in a few minutes on Beer Sessions Radio.
This episode is supported by HRN business members, the restaurants Popina and Gus's Chop House, rooted in being welcoming places for people to gather over great food and wine in their Brooklyn neighborhoods. Popina, in the Columbia Street Waterfront District, is a neighborhood restaurant that slings pasta, hot chicken, and champagne. And Gus's Chop House in Carroll Gardens takes inspiration from European chop houses and casual bistros. The restaurants support HRN's creative, educational reporting and storytelling that drive conversations to make the world a better, fairer, more delicious place.
Hey, welcome back to Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. Hey, it's our 14th year, and join us, become a member at heritageradionetwork.org/donate. So we're up in Portland, Maine. This is our first session at the Craft Malt Conference, talking with Branch from Allagash Brewing and Ben from Blue Ox Malt. So you're smiling over there, Branch. This is a great time, right? Craft Malt Conference, brewers being in Allagash being here in Portland.
Yeah, it's great. Maltsters are the nicest. And it's great. We've been trying to put this together for the last 3 years, and I think there's some sort of global issue or something that happened, but we're finally here together, and it's really nice to finally meet everybody in person.
Okay, let's dive deep. So, you're the brewery manager. Again, what's the full title that you have?
Brewhouse manager.
Brewhouse manager, and Ben is at Blue Ox Malt. So let's talk shop. So you're getting the nuts and bolts, deliveries coming in, the malt coming in. Let's talk about that process, because I like to know those things, and our listeners do too. You guys can talk together. What's it like getting malt? How far ahead do you order it? And maybe in particular with Blue Ox Malt. Let's talk about some insider trade stuff.
Well, I think the big thing for us with Blue Ox and local maltsters is just being able to communicate really well. And like when we have issues, they're very responsive, and like I know I can call up Joel and talk to him about it. Or if I were to say forget to order something for a beer we're brewing the next day, I can like drive up to Lisbon Falls and pick it up, which I can't do with places based in the Midwest. But on the other hand, like we try to be flexible with them too. So in terms of our ordering, we basically we've tried to commit as much as we can to say how much we're going to buy for the year and have more or less a set schedule where we get them, just so that they can have that steady demand in their production schedule.
A big part of it for us is just having, very solution-oriented adaptability and learning the production schedules of the breweries that we're partnered with. Some of the breweries are on the larger side and they have flagships. Some of them are much smaller and much more experimental. And just being able to kind of constantly accommodate those needs through, our production schedule to make sure that we have product available so that, they can make the good stuff.
So, like a typical delivery, how much malt are you getting from Blue Ox?
One thing we do with Blue Ox that I appreciate is we're basically buying a full malt floor at a time, so 8,000 pounds, and we get everything in super sacks, more or less everything in super sacks, so giant totes that hold 2,000 pounds. So we'll get those on a regular basis. I forget the exact. It's every 3 weeks, I think.
About that, yep.
Yeah. So another nice thing that we have set up at Blue Ox is we don't like wasting plastic. So we've set it up so that we can actually reuse the super sacks. Like they have super sacks set up for us. We clean them out, package them up, and they actually get returned and refilled. So it's not a one-time use thing, which is kind of an important thing for us.
So how many truckloads is that?
So generally we're getting in, about like 19 super sacks of raw barley when we get a grain shipment of raw grain that's to be malted. And then we'll send out, it's about a half a truck, I guess. A half a truck of product, or it depends on the size of the truck, I would suppose. But yeah, it's about a truck, a box truck of grain every 3 weeks. And then, yeah, it's quite a bit. I mean, it really is a lot of grain coming in and a lot of grain going out. We have a turnaround time of, about a week. So that's kind of what we're working with as far as production time. So really, yeah, like I said, it's about understanding the production schedule of the breweries that we're working with, so we can kind of stay, if the beer is in the tank for 3 weeks, we want to be 3 weeks ahead of that with the malt, just kind of making sure that we're always properly pacing so that we can, fit all those supply chain needs. And that allows us to give kind of a layer of predictability to the farmers that we work with. They're working on a much larger scale. I mean, I think one harvest would be enough grain for us for close to a year, at least at our current size. So that's, something to kind of consider while we're, moving forward with ordering raw product and converting it into malt.
Yeah, and Branch, jumping ahead, what malt for what beers?
We kind of play it two ways. We have malts that we use in specific beers, local malt. So like River Trip is a beer we make that's just about 50% local malt, and it's all Blue Ox malt. Originally, when we were developing the recipe, it's sort of an evolution of another recipe we used to do, hoppy table beer, and that was using Maris Otter, which is English style floor malted malt, generally floor malted. What we got was floor malted. So when we were changing the recipe and adjusting it, one of the things we wanted to do was use more Blue Ox's malt because we thought it was a good pairing. It's also floor malted. It had some of the same characteristics we were looking for. So in that case, we did call for a specific malt. But the other approach we take, like with white, it's a smaller portion. It's about 10% of the overall malted barley. So in that case, we're more flexible because we also are using Maine Malt House. And in that case, we more or less use Blue Ox interchangeably with Maine Malt.
Sorry, what was the question?
Good, that's his filler. These guys, this is great being at the conference and nobody's really coming in prepared to talk about. But these guys have a lot of knowledge and a lot of working knowledge, so I'm really happy to be with them. Ben, matching malts with beers. You know, what about when you have a new brewery or you've got a new malt? You know, there's a sales aspect to it and education. You know, how does someone figure out what malt, not just the type of barley, but like the malt that you guys have? You know, is it all trial and error, or you go in with a recipe for people?
A lot of it is just kind of asking the right questions, figuring out, what's the flavor that they're trying to achieve, what's the style that they're trying to achieve, the color, that's all stuff that we have access to through quality control, through our lab work. We're testing our SRM. So we kind of try to get an idea of what does the beer want to look like, taste like, et cetera. Where do you want to end up in terms of ABV? And from there, we can kind of build out through the variety that we have in our portfolio. A good example is, you can achieve haze in beer through a number of ways. We offer chip malt, which is a relatively under-modified malt that will kind of bestow some of the characteristics of sort of that grassiness that raw barley has, as well as a lot of protein. So you can get some haze through that. You could also do it through flaked oats. There's multiple ways to kind of achieve that, and it's really just about honing in on what the brewery is, trying to produce in the end product.
Not to do sales for you, but also like sometimes you just bring samples and they taste delicious, and that kind of inspires people. Like we have a big pilot program, so we're constantly brewing and trying new beers, and pretty often they're like inspired by something that Blue Ox has dropped off or another supplier's dropped off, where it's like, this is something really cool, something we want to work with. How can we use this? And another aspect of that I think Blue Ox has really pushed, and the Craft Malt Guild in general has pushed, is the hot steep method for malt evaluation.
And then, so you're on the board of the Craft Maltsters Guild. What are the things that are being talked about? I know that developing the hot steep method was important, right?
Yeah. Just it's hard to getting people to realize the differences in malt and tasting it in a consistent way. Like you can kind of describe based on chewing the grain, but really you want it in that liquid. And it was a way to just make it consistent across the board, like much easier to compare different malts in a consistent and repeatable way.
So it's kind of like if you're a buyer of coffee beans, something similar.
Yeah, I think it would be like cupping. I don't know if you've ever done a cupping with the slurping of the spoon, but yeah, it's a similar idea.
I've only done cupping in the new age, healing. No, more about this, because I think about the numbers of the data of testing and malt. There are times that you just need certain malts that fit your numbers for production, right? And it's helpful that you have the testing. But do you always do the hot steep and try out the malt, since there could be variations? Are there, with all the numbers, do the numbers tell you everything in the tests that tasting doesn't? Both of you answer that one.
The numbers are great for allowing consistency, but we do a hot steep on every piece that we do. So every time we run a floor of malt and it comes out of the kiln, we do run a sensory on that. And that's also something that we do like to share with our customers when we drop off samples or we have them at the malt house. Kind of to circle back to something that we talked about at the beginning of this, with ingredients, there's a lot of sort of, we were talking about palate and double IPAs and how do you not, fatigue your palate. Malty beers tend to be, I think, they have a lot of nuance to them. And I think that kind of lends to, between different varieties of malt, there are some very minute, but, absolute differences. And so being able to, do a side-by-side between, all right, this is a pale, a Vienna, and a light Munich. And, they might all kind of have a center of the Venn diagram, but they also branch out in different ways, and they're going to, offer different flavors after fermentation. So, just being able to have that, access to the sensory program that we have, and also being able to extend that to our customers is really important to us.
We don't do a hot steep on every batch we receive, every lot we receive, just because we don't have that much bandwidth to do that. We do it regularly, but not for everyone. And the numbers, we look at the numbers, they're all supplied and we expect to get them. But for the most part, we're just looking for outliers. If we're making white beer, we don't, and they send a pail that's a very dark pale, we probably won't use it for white because it'll make it no longer white. It'll make it orange. So in that sense, we're looking for some numbers, but in general, not too strongly.
So a lot of the knowledge of craft malt from farmers to maltsters to brewers has really grown a lot in the last 10 years. Is there something that I'm missing? Like that, in that story, you told me how you guys had made a first beer with craft malt and then you make 16 counties all the time. And that Maine special, a lot of the local economy, but is there something missing in that story from like 5 or 10 years ago that, I don't know. There's probably something in there. I'm making Branch think because he's a thinker.
Looks are deceiving. I guess I'm not quite sure I understand the question.
I don't either. So I'm just trying to go a little deeper with you guys. In Ben, take a stab in it because I've heard it's part of the Blue Ox malt story.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is. If you look at the last 10 years, the beer industry in Maine, both in terms of style and just sheer, numbers, has changed quite a bit. Growth is a good word for it, but it doesn't really encompass exactly what's kind of happened. And obviously, the last 3 years have kind of been unique, for lack of a better term, given the, just circumstances of the world. But, yeah, gosh, it's hard to put into words. I wouldn't necessarily use the term renaissance. I think that this has been kind of a long time coming. The precursors of this sort of local craft beer movement kind of started in, gosh, I couldn't even put a date to it. It'd have to be the 80s. Before my time, for sure. 70, yeah. But it's changed a bunch. And, the one thing that hasn't necessarily changed is that you need barley to make beer. And that's kind of what's been nice, at Blue Ox, establishing, us as sort of a local bastion for, being a support system for agriculture, as well as being able to allow breweries to offer, the best product available to the end consumer.
And Branch, a little more.
I think I have an answer for you now. I think the hard part is just educating the consumer. At this point, people, if they see Citra, they know what that means. They know hops by name, and kind of getting malt to that level where it's like people know, we're at the point where people don't even necessarily know that beer is made with barley. So educating the end consumer, getting them to appreciate these nuances and want to buy them, I think is sort of like a goal. Just appreciating what goes into what people consume.
Yeah, and is there anything? There's a couple great sessions here at the conference. Is there any session that you're either, both looking forward to attending, or someone here that you've enjoyed meeting?
I'm really looking forward to learning more about distilling. I think distilling is definitely, relative to beer, underrepresented in Maine. And it's definitely where I know the least as far as, the alcohol industry and the way that grain interfaces with it goes. I'm excited to see some of the, topics on single malt distilling and, barley performance in distilling, what's important, things like that. I have a general sense, but that's kind of what, that's sort of the next frontier for me personally. And that's not to say that there's not more I can learn about beer, because the longer I feel like you spend in the beer industry, the more there is to learn in some ways. But yeah, that's definitely where my focus is, and then just seeing some of the insights as to where where palates are going. We can guess all day, but I don't think anybody predicted seltzer, and I think people thought it was a here today, gone tomorrow type thing, and it's still kind of here. So, but
And Branch?
For me, I'm a little myopic and like, that might not be right, but insular, like everything is Maine. And that's sort of what I've known about malt for a while. And being able to just see how or craft malt anyway, and being able to see how other places are growing barley, malting barley, and how the wider world is doing it. So meeting all these maltsters from California and Norway and France and Virginia and Colorado, I think a lot of it's just getting a wider view of the world of craft malt.
Great. And then so when I'm visiting Portland, can I visit Allagash? What's available for tourists?
Yeah, you can come visit Allagash. When are you coming? I'll give you a tour. We are open. Let me make sure I get this right. The tasting room is closed on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but we're open Thursday through Monday. I think we open at 11, and last call is 6, I believe. You should check the website.
All right, thanks, man. It's definitely on the list of anyone coming to Portland. And Blue Ox Malt, can people come and take tours? I know yesterday there was a big tour for the conference.
we always offer industry tours to our partners in breweries and distilleries. I don't know that at this very moment we're offering tours to the public. That is something that we have done before, and it's definitely something that we're interested in doing. But as of right now, we're not open to the public, but we do like letting people see, what's kind of going on behind the scenes. That is sort of a big part in, like you said, kind of establishing more ingredient affinity, at least, or getting us, as barley malters, getting us a little bit closer to where hops are in terms of recognition as an ingredient.
That's great. And to wrap it up, either one of you, I'd like to say, do you have a question for the other guest? I'm sure you do. You can take a minute and think about it. I'm going to say that Branch is very polite because many guests who come on will say it's okay to curse. And I said, I don't usually say it's not, but he did not curse. So, but you can curse.
No, I wouldn't even know the words. I was curious, if you are going to do tours, will you have a tasting room as part of that? Will you be able to get samples?
Well, in addition to hot steeps, we do like to. In addition to hot steeps, we do like to offer, trying some of the stuff that showcases our product, within reason. But I mean, gosh, personally, and I can't speak on Joel's behalf, but I would love to be able to set up some sort of a draft system at the malt house so that we could, have beers being presented in, I think probably the most suitable format for quality, that being draft. And but yeah, I mean that's just a pipe dream at this point. But
Another question.
Or maybe just finish the expansion before you move on to that.
Sure. Yeah. We do have other irons in the fire currently, as it were. We're working through an expansion right now, which we're very excited about. It's going to increase our capacity quite a bit and allow us some flexibility to really, get more variety and just kind of allow us to be, even more accommodating to breweries' production schedules, in terms of both base malt and specialty product.
And then Ben, do you have a question for Branch? And maybe put your sales cap on.
Oh, man. I was going to ask, what's your favorite color? I do have. So, what was the transition from bottles to cans like for Allagash? Can you speak to that at all? Is that
good question?
I can
be a bit loaded, but
I can speak a little bit. I don't handle the packaging, or I try not to. I mean, unless I'm drinking it. But it was a major transition for us. We put in the canning line in 2019, and the timing probably couldn't have been better. Like, we were very, very draft heavy. We're still pretty draft heavy as a brewery. But during the pandemic, there weren't a lot of bars and restaurants open. So like draft was gone just all of a sudden. And the fact that we were able to pivot and can a lot and bottle a lot made basically, it would have been even more of a struggle without being able to do that. So it was a big pivot. We're basically in production 4 days a week. And I think we're at the point now where we're canning more often than we're bottling. And personally, like we get a case of beer every week to take home and do quality control on. And I kind of was a purist, and I was like, oh, bottles are the right way. But it turns out I take cans home more often than bottles, so it's a good package.
Thank you guys so much. Branch from Allagash Brewing and Ben from Blue Ox Malt. One of our first interviews at the Craft Malt Conference in Portland, Maine. Really appreciate you guys joining me. Big shout out to Armin Spengen, our engineer, who's going to clean this up, and this will be airing sometime in March 2023. Thanks so much, guys. I'm Jimmy Carboni. We'll catch you next time. Beer Sessions Radio on Heritage Radio Network. All right.
Thank you, Jimmy.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Beer Sessions Radio is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network. Food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.